Welcome to the class on Tanya, Introduction to Tanya. In this class we're going to learn about the book of Tanya. And it's very apropos that we're learning about it now because this Sunday is the holiday of Shavuot, which is the day that we received the Torah, Mount Sinai. And actually today there's a daily study of Tanya, and today is the day that we actually complete the entire first section of Tanya. Tanya is split up into 5 sections. Today we complete the entire first section made up of 53 chapters. So if you're studying daily, so actually today is the day that we make a completion on the book of Tanya, so it's very apropos that we talk about Tanya today. Now, before we get to talking about Tanya, I had other papers here. No. Let me see that. I had my notes printed out. Yeah, there's one more. Thank you.
Another sheet?
No, it's only one. I just had some notes that I printed out. So before we talk about Tanya, we need to first talk about the author of Tanya and the background of Tanya, and then we'll understand why it's such an important book. What is this book? Why are we talking about it? Why is it something that there have been so many who have been encouraging me to begin a class on this book? So we're going to give a little bit of background, starting with the Baal Shem Tov. Who was the Baal Shem Tov? It was back in the late 1700s. The Jewish community were facing every single day hardships. There were pogroms. Pogroms where people would come through towns and literally wipe out Jewish communities one after another. There's all kinds of suffering. There's spiritual suffering. The Jewish people were just failed by a failed Messiah known as the Shabtai Tzvi. There were other people coming along trying to claim to be saviors of the Jewish people, and many, many awful things were happening to the Jewish people, and it was very difficult then. It so happened that there was a older man named Eliezer and his wife. They were very, very poor, and they lived in a town in Russia, more in the Ukraine area, small town, and he was very, very poor. But one thing that he tried to do is, even if he had very, very meager livings, he tried to at least provide whatever he can to guests and to people that came to visit town. So that's what he did. Rabbi Eliezer would, anytime there was a guest that he saw, a visitor from town that came into shul, he would go over to him, invite him into his house, take him, help him and greet him in for Shabbos, give him something to eat, etc. Came one day, there was an individual that came to town, and he was shunned by the community. Why was he shunned by the community, this guy? He was a traveler. He was clearly a traveler, and he wasn't very much respectable of the community because he came on Shabbos, which doing that then meant that that individual was an apostate. You see, it's not like today there's a concept of secular Jews. It was you were either traditional Jewish or you're an apostate and you were following other religions. And here you have this individual coming, and he came on Shabbos. He was very disrespectful in the community, and people didn't seem to like this individual, and so they shunned him. And Eliezer always tried to find guests. So Eliezer went over to him. He was at that time very, very old. According to some people, he was already in his late 90s. And he had not had any children. Him and his wife never had children. So this individual was in town. He invited him over to his house. And all the communities, they're talking to each other, all these people. Wow, he's inviting this guy into his house. What's going on? And he came to his house, and he did not give him an easy time. He gave him a very hard time. And nevertheless, Eliezer gave him a lot of respect. He gave him his best pillows and blankets. He gave him his best food, even though it was very difficult for him to help this guest. came at the end of Shabbos, and this guest tells him, look, I want to tell you what's going on here. I am really not a simple guest in town. I am Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet. And I came here because on high, they were looking for a soul. They're looking for a special soul that can come down into this world that is going to change the course of Jewish history forever. And I want you to know that you and your wife, even though you're very old and never had children, you are going to be blessed with a child. And this child you're going to name him Yisrael. Yisrael means Israel, because he is going to be the light of the Jewish people. And with that was born Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem, also known as the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov worked as he grew up. His father passed away when he was very, very young, around 4 or 5 years old. Before his father passed away, he told him 2 things. He said, number 1, you should never fear anything, only fear Hashem, only fear God. And the second thing he said is that you need to love every Jew, no matter what. And these were the 2 messages that his father gave him on his deathbed, and he lived with that his entire life. And this was essentially the foundation of what later became known as the Chassidic movement. Now you have to understand, this concept of loving every Jew was something that was not really accepted back then. Because back then you had the elite Jews and then you had the simple Jews. They didn't mingle. You had those who were the learned, the scholarly, the educated. Then you had the simple Jews who would work on the farms, and they never mingled with each other. And the Baal Shem Tov, as he grew up and he started to travel from town to town, he would show a lot of love and care to these simple Jews who were never respected. And he started changing this tide. He started welcoming in these simple Jews, and he had with him a whole following that they were undercover tzaddikim, hidden tzaddikim, and they would go from town to town, posing as simple travelers, simple businessmen, and they would bring close the simple Jews in town, and they would try to show them love and care, and they would be makar of them. They would bring them close, and they would educate them and learn with them, etc. Later on, the Baal Shem Tov had a student named the Maggid of Mezrich. The Maggid of Mezrich, his name was Rabbi Dovber. He came from the town of Mezrich, so he's the Maggid of Mezrich, and he took over the Chassidic movement. And he continued on his ways, although very different style. He didn't travel around as much. He wasn't as outgoing. But the same concept of Chassidus, which is to try and love and serve and fear God. And the second point, which is to love every single Jew. And he kept preaching this as well. And so the Maggid continued on. Then came along, a young boy was born in the year 1745 in a small town called Liadi. He was born to a great scholar named Reb Baruch, who was the great-grandson and the mystic of the scholar Rabbi Yehuda Loew, known as the Maharal of Prague. Maharal. Ever heard of the Maharal? You ever heard of the Golem of Prague? Yeah. Right. He was the one that created the Golem of Prague. He lived in the city of Prague. He was very prominent. They named him Shcneur Zalman. The word Shcneur means 2 lights, because they saw that there were 2 great lights that are going to come from this man one day. What were the 2 lights? The lights of Nigla, the revealed part of Torah, and the lights of Chassidus. He eventually wrote 2 very great works, amongst others. A brilliant, brilliant young man. It says that it was at the age of 9 years old, he gave a class on one of the most complex areas of Jewish study, and that is the laws of Kiddush HaChodesh, blessing of the moon. And if anyone ever studied it, it has complex calculations of how to know exactly when the moon will appear each and every month. At 9 years old, he taught the congregation about this, and the greatest scholars there, as it's written, the story, the greatest scholars there couldn't find their hands and feet from his talk. This was the brilliance of the Alter Rebbe. But being he was brilliant, he wanted to go study more. He wanted to go study from other teachers. But he couldn't find teachers that he wanted. So at that time, there were two schools of thought. What we know today as the Chassidim and the Misnagdim. The Misnagdim literally means those who were against the Chassidim. And those were a group of people who did not want to follow the Chassidic movement. And at that time, they were led by an individual known as the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, the sage of Vilna, the city of Vilna. And most of their schools were in the Vilna area, and in general Lithuania and Poland. And then you had the others who were more in Russia, and that was the Maggid of Mezrich, Rabbi Dovber. Now the Alter Rebbe, he was now trying to find which yeshiva could he go study in, which school should he follow. So some said he should go study in Vilna, because that's where the greatest minds of the time were known to be. The greatest scholars were known to be in Vilna at that time. But he said, I'm going to go instead to study by the Maggid, by Rabbi Dover of Mezrich. Why? He said, to study, I know how to study, but there's one thing that I don't know how to do well. And what is that? I don't know how to daven. I don't know how to pray. And what does it mean doesn't know how to pray? Of course, he knows how to say the words. But he says, I don't know how to pray, meaning I don't know how to properly connect to God when I pray. That's something that only the school of Hasidism can give me, or the Hasidic thought. Only there I can learn how to properly connect to God, how to properly meditate, how to properly learn how to connect to something higher. To study, I could study. It's not so hard to study. But to connect to a higher source, to connect to God, for that I have to go to this town of Mezrich, where the Maggid was. And so he went and he traveled to the Maggid. The Maggid, by the way, means a teller, a sayer, a talker, a discusser. So he comes to the Maggid, and he starts telling the Maggid of why I came here and who I am. And the Maggid smiles to him and says, I know who you are. I've heard about you from my teacher, the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov said that there's going to be a young man one day who's going to come to you by this and this name, Shcneur Zalman. He's going to come to you, he's going to study, he's going to learn. And you should know that this is where the future of Judaism lies, in this individual, in this man. Eventually he wrote a code of Jewish law, Shcneur, code of Jewish law, and then the Tanya. Now what does this all have to do with the Tanya? So we know a little bit of history, but why am I giving you this history? So eventually the Alter Rebbe took over the Hasidic movement, amongst others. There were other disciples who also took over, but there were two general schools of thought of Hasidism. One which are known as the Chagas Chassidim, which stands for the words Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, and the other is known as Chabad Chassidim, Chachma Bina Dat. Now those who have been in our Kabbalah classes in the past know Chachma Bina Dat, knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, are the three levels of intellect. And then you have the three emotions, Chesed, kindness, Gevura, severity, and Tiferet, beauty. So there are two ways that the Chassidic philosophy accepted to follow. One was the Chagas, which is that which says that you need to serve God with emotions. You need to serve God with your emotions, which means you need to get energized when you pray. You need to try and inspire yourself. You need to get excited. And there were many Hasidic leaders who were disciples of the Baal Shem Tov and of the Maggid of Mezrich. Many of these disciples who became great leaders, great Jewish leaders, and they followed this school of thought, which was you have to serve God through inspiration. Serve God through inspiration. And where does that inspiration come from? For the most part, the inspiration comes from your Rebbe, from your teacher. Till today, there are many, many Chassidim who follow this school of thought, which is that you follow the Rebbe. The Rebbe inspires you, and then you're able to serve God properly with the inspiration of your Rebbe, of your teacher inspiring you. And many, many people still follow this today. You go in Borough Park, in Williamsburg, in Mea Sharim, there are many, many Hasidim who follow this. But the Alter Rebbe, as he was known, Shcneur Zalman, he eventually became known the Alter Rebbe. What does the Alter Rebbe mean? The Alter Rebbe means the old rabbi. Why is he called the Alter Rebbe, the old rabbi? Because he was the first of this chain of the Chabad Chassidic dynasty. And his grandchildren eventually just started calling him the old rabbi, even though he passed away relatively young, 68 years old, but he was still referred to as the old rabbi. And when he started taking over, when the Alter Rebbe, we'll refer to him here on now as the Alter Rebbe, when he took over, the Hasidic movement of his disciples and from those who were following him, he originally made very, very exclusive and elite schools. Chadarim, they're called Chadarim. Cheder means a school. And this was only for the greatest top scholars. Very, very few people were able to get in here. And it was to these people that the Alter Rebbe would teach the philosophy of the Chabad Chassidic. The philosophy of Chabad Chassidic. And then he would meet with these individuals one-on-one personally, on personal level, and he would each give them their directive in how to serve God properly. These were individuals who were masters in Torah study. They knew by heart the entire Torah, the entire Talmud, the entire Medrash, backwards and forward by heart. These were individuals who wanted to go the next step beyond simple study. Eventually, 5 years later, he opened it up to a next level. And these were individuals who were not as great as the first level. And they had their own way of serving God. He would teach them each on their level. And then and he would meet with them personally, giving them each their own way to serve God. Each individual personally, he would meet with them. His meeting was called Yechidus, which means one-on-one meeting. And this was a meeting of souls. A meeting of souls. You would connect your soul and you would see to it. He would look into you and say, what is your soul's purpose on earth? What is your purpose here? For example, there was one time an individual who was a very, very great Torah scholar. And the Alter Rebbe looked at him and said, I think you should become a wagon driver. And he was devastated. He was devastated. First of all, it was a very lowly job to be a wagon driver. And second of all, he didn't even know how to drive a wagon. He could barely hold a horse. And then it ended up and eventually what ended up happening is because he was driving a wagon, he ended up meeting a Jew in an inn who tried to convert, and he was able to convince him back to coming back to the Jewish faith because of this individual. And after he came back, after this mission, the Alter Rebbe then told him, now you could go back to being yourself, being the rabbi that you are meant to be. So, but this is the way it is. You look at each and every individual and say, this is your purpose on life. This is the way you have to serve God. Eventually, every 5 years, you'd bring another school of a lower level, another school of a lower level. And what ends up happening is when you have too many people, it becomes physically impossible to connect to everyone. So that's when the Alter Rebbe started publishing booklets. And in these booklets, he started writing different ways to serve God. And he says, these ways to serve God, I am publishing them because number one, I don't have time to go to meet everyone individual. And number two, within these, everyone will be able to find some way to serve God. These things that are being distributed will be able to connect to each and every individual. You'll be able to find your life's mission if you study these books. How do you know? How are these booklets different than anything else? There are many self-help books that come out. There are many books called Musar at that time. Musar is another school of thought of self-help and self-inspiration. And so how do we know that this book is going to be different? Or these booklets, at that time they were booklets. So he says for two reasons. Number one, because I personally met with the people and I know what's going through people's lives and what's happening in their souls. I didn't just sit down and write a book, or at that time it was booklets, because I think that this is a good way that will help people. Rather, it came about because of my hundreds of meetings that I had personally with individuals, and they, between each other, we went through their struggles and their challenges. And so therefore, this is a book that speaks to the individuals who I know we've already talked to, and I've worked with, and I've talked, and I've inspired. And so these are individuals that are affected by this book, and so therefore I know every single person will find it. And we're going to learn more about this in the introduction to the Tanya, which is going to be on our first class of Tanya, where we'll actually read through the introduction that he explains these concepts. But because of this, he says, I am able to give a real meaningful inspiration to each individual. And he started writing these booklets and distributing them. What happened? As these booklets were being distributed, so you had another group called the Misnagdim. As we mentioned earlier, they were called those against the Hasidim. They were not in favor of the Hasidic movement. And so what they would do is they would take these booklets and they would start they would copy them, which then copying usually meant by hand, unless you were able to afford a very expensive printing. And they would make deliberate mistakes. And they would deliberately change things that would make the booklets look bad, especially to the Russian government. And eventually the Alter Rebbe did get arrested by the Russian government because of these booklets. So he sat down and he worked for 2 years. For 2 years putting these booklets together. And he finally put it together in one book, which he called Likutei Amarim, a gathering of sayings. Gathering of sayings. Sayings. If you say something, in his humility, he didn't say that it was his book. He said it's a collection of different books that I've received from my teachers, the Baal Shem Tov, from the Maharal of Prague, from the Shalah, Shnei Luchat Brit, Rabbi Yeshaya Horowitz, and other great Kabbalistic scholars. And he put this book together, and he officially had it printed in the press. It took him 2 years, and he rewrote the entire thing, mostly the same with a few changes. It took him 2 years to write it. And finally he had it distributed in the year 1797. Shortly after that he was arrested, and eventually he was released on the 19th of Kislev. And it's on that day that, on the 20th of Kislev, which was the first printing of the Tanya, and we celebrate the 19th of Kislev and the 20th of Kislev as the day of what we call the Rosh Hashanah for Hasidus, and that's the day that we officially restart the annual cycle of studying Tanya on the 19th day of the month of Kislev. And so so now, why are we studying this book now? And so the answer is that when he wrote this book, he wrote it very clearly that for all generations, you should be able to find something in this book that is going to talk to you. Something in this book is going to have meaning to every single individual. It's a book for everyone. It's every man's self-help book. Because it talks to every man, it talks to the regular person, it talks to the holy person, it talks to the Rasha, it talks to the evil person. It talks to people struggling with stress. It talks to people struggling with depression. It talks to people who are struggling with self-interests. It talks to people who are struggling with purpose. Anything that is making a person's life, internal life, for whatever reason, complex in any way, with their self-image, this is a book that speaks to them. And there are things of Tanya that helps people with relationships. There's always something in there that we can learn from anyone who wants to properly serve God and find their purpose in this earth. And it was written intentionally that every single person throughout all generations should be able to learn, study, and gain from it. And again, how was it able to be done? Because it was written by an individual who was able to read every single soul. He was able to see every single soul. He could see what are the challenges of that soul, what are the difficulties of that soul. And he saw this through thousands and thousands of his Chassidim. And so he says, this is for you. Now, he also introduced another concept which says, well, how would you know what's meant for you? And in that he says, as we'll read, he introduced a concept called mashpia, which means to find someone that you trust and that you accept as your teacher and your mentor, who shall help you find your purpose in this book, help you find your life's mission in this book. Sometimes you may not always see it right away. So you need to find someone that you can trust who will help you with it. So this is in general what the book of Tanya is about. This is the background to this book. So eventually it was printed and distributed and was known and later became known as the Torah, the Bible of Chassidus, the Bible of Chabad Chassidic. Now, how is this different than the other sects of Chassidim that we talked about earlier? Because this book introduces a very radical concept, perhaps. And that is that until then, there was the understanding that the way to properly connect to your soul is through your emotions. Through inspiring your emotions, that is the way that you connect to your soul. That was always the given understanding of how to work on yourself. And in this book, he introduces a concept called Moach Shalat al Halev, which means that the mind overpowers the heart, the emotions, of how to control yourself, not with your emotions, but with your mind. And hence the concept of Chabad Chassidic, which is, Chabad again means Chachma, Bina, Das, knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. How we make our choices not based on what we feel, but based on what we understand and know. And this at that time, it still is a very radical concept. Most people, when they deal with self-help, they try and work on their feelings, their emotions. And over here, we learn about how the proper way to approach it is not by your emotions, but by your intellect. And of course, we'll talk about this more when we actually get into the actual book of Tanya on its own. And this is the idea of Chabad, Chachma, Bina, Das, knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. This is why it's called Chabad Chassidic as opposed to Chagas Chassidic. Now, what is so unique about this Because when you're dealing with your emotions, so the understanding then was that you need an inspiration. The inspiration comes from your Rebbe, comes from your teacher, and then you'll be able to serve God properly. And in this book, we're introduced to the idea that you don't rely on anyone but yourself. You are the sole individual responsible for what you do, what you say, what you feel, and you are able to make those choices. And in Chabad Chassidic, there's no shortcuts. You have to do it. Now you say, so why do we have a Rebbe in Chabad Chassidic? The Rebbe is there to teach you, to help you learn, to help you understand what is your job. But to do it, you have to do it yourself. And if you're not ready to make that move, then you're not ready to actually change. In other schools of thought, they have a Rebbe, a teacher who is inspiring them, and they're able to take from that inspiration and allow that to affect their soul. In Chabad Chassidic, no, you have to work on yourself. You have to find yourself, find your purpose, find your mission, and you have to go do it. No one's going to help. No one's going to do it for you. Shouldn't say no one's going to help you. Yes, you will have help, but no one's going to do it for you. And this is another concept of what is taught in this book of Tanya, of how you are able to affect yourself and not how someone will do it for you. So the full message of Tanya is beyond the scope today, but we are going to focus on one phrase of Tanya, and that is the one phrase that is introduced in the title page of the book of Tanya. So in order to understand this, we need to first take a look at the book, that the text in the Torah, in Deuteronomy, where this comes from. This is Moses talking to the Jewish people before his passing. And he says like this, Ki ha-mitzvah hazos, now I'm in your text page now. For this commandment which I command you this day, asher anochi mitzavcha hayom, lo nifleisi mimcha, it is not concealed from you, v'lo rechoika hi, nor is it far away. So he says, the commandments that I'm telling you today, it's not concealed from you, and it is not far away. Then he continues on, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, and he tells the Jewish people, Lo v'shamayim hi lemar. It is not in the heaven that you shall say, Mi ya'ala lanu hashamayim, who will go up to the heaven for us and fetch it for us. V'yikocheha lanu, v'yashmienu esav na'aseha, so we can hear it and fulfill it. So it's not up in the heavens, says Moses. These mitzvahs that I'm commanding you, they're not far away from you. They're not in the heaven. And he continues on, V'lo me'ever layamhi, nor is it beyond the sea. Lamar, to say, Mi'aver lanu el ever ayam, who will cross to the other side of the sea? V'yikacheh lanu v'yashmienu, and it will fetch it for us, and tell it to us, and take it for us. V'nasena, and we will fulfill it. It's not in the heavens, and it's not across the sea. Now, what is it referring to? The heavens? What is it referring to as the sea? So, there's different commentaries. But what does it mean that we shouldn't think that the Torah is something that is too spiritual for us, or that it's too low for us, or too hidden from us? Rather, he continues on in the final verse, Kikarov elecha hadara miyod, it is very close to you, this thing is very close to you, beficha uvilvavcha, in your mind, in your mouth, and in your heart, la'asoso, to do it, to do this, to fulfill it. This thing is very close to you. What is this thing that's very close to you? You have some commentaries. You have the Ramban who says the thing that it's referring to is tshuva, repentance. It's all referring to repentance. Say, don't think that you're not able to repent. So this last verse, Kikari v'lecha hadavar miyai befichol v'levcha lasasa. Rather, this thing is very close to you. It is in your mouth, in your heart, and you can fulfill it in your actions. This one verse, verse 14, is the entire book of Tanya. 53 chapters. And this, how many words is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 words. 8 words is the entire book of Tanya. This thing is very close to you. It is in your mouth. It's in your heart to do. If you know that, then you know the entire Tanya. What does it mean it's very close? First of all, what is the thing that's very close? So we're not talking about mitzvahs, it's talking about Torah and mitzvahs. Moshe is telling the people, Torah and mitzvahs is very close to you. Don't think it's in the heavens far away. Don't think it's in the sea. Rather, it's something that's very close for you that you are able to do.
Yeah, that's right. It's right there. God just gave it to you.
Okay.
You know.
So now comes the question.
Now
So
you got to read it.
So if it's so easy, then why do we have such a hard time with it?
Wait, say that again, please.
I said, if it's so easy, then why do we have such a hard time with it? If it's so easy to do Torah and mitzvahs,
Because we're not paying attention.
we're not paying attention because we're stubborn. So is it really easy? Is the question? Is it easy to be a Jew?
No.
Is it easy? Right? It's some people say it's hard to be Jewish. It's not easy. We have 613 commandments. Okay, not all of them we could keep today. We have a lot of commandments. Every single thing you do has its ways that has to be done in a Jewish way. We wake up in the morning. There's a prayer that said we go prepare to eat. There are prayers to say we go to work. There's prayers to say we go to the bathroom. There's prayers to say we have to put on tefillin each day. We have to put a mezuzah on our door. We have to keep Shabbos. We have to take off holidays. It's not easy to be a Jew. And Moses is looking here at the Jewish people and saying, ladies and gentlemen, it's very, very easy. Now, one of the things the Talmud says, that what is very easy? It's easy. It's easy to fear God. It's easy to fear God. So the Talmud says, what do you mean it's easy to fear God? So the Talmud answers yes, L'gabe Moshe, to Moses, it's a very simple thing. What do you mean? To Moses, it's simple to fear God, but that doesn't answer everyone else. What about the rest of us? Where does it leave the rest of us? And so what does it mean exactly, and this is discussed in Tanya, but what does it mean exactly that this thing is easy, that it's very easy to be a Jew? It's very easy to follow the commandments. Beficha, and so the second half of the answer is in the second half of the verse, which is it's very close to you. Beficha, in your mouth, v'vavcha, in your heart, la'asoso, to fulfill it. Let's take a look in how the Alter Rebbe introduces this in his title page. This is the title page of Tanya. I'll show it to you the way it looks actually in the book of Tanya, so you can see. This is actually what it looks like in the book of Tanya. This is the title page. And when we start our studies of Tanya, annually we actually start with this page, because this encompasses the entire book in 2 sentences, 3 sentences. So he begins and says, let's read inside, Sefer Likutei Amarim, a compilation of teachings, part 1, Chelik Rishon. Because, why do I say part 1? Because eventually when it was printed, so the main section of the first 53 chapters was printed as one section, and then there was another 4 other sections of Tanya. He has a section called Shar HaYichud VeEmunah, which means the gate of the oneness and belief, which mostly talks about philosophical belief in God. Then there's Igeres HaTshuva, which is 12 chapters that talk about the Chassidic view on repentance. What does it mean to repent? Igeres HaKodesh is in many, and Kuntras Achman, which is the last section, are a collection of different writings that came later on, in letters to people or in different situations where he penned different things that were not included in the main book. But the main book of Tanya, the first 53 chapters, is the first section. Now, he entitled this book, we call it Tanya, but what's the actual title of the book? So first of all, it's called Likutei Amarim, which means a compilation of teachings, which is entitled Sefer Shel Beinanim, the book of intermediates. The intermediates. What does this tell you right away from calling it the book of intermediates? Huh? No, not in that sense. Intermediates meaning intermediate people. Meaning that this is for the type of people who are not the elite, highest class of study. And it's also not for those who have zero interest in anything. Rather, it's for someone who is a Beinani, a regular, an intermediate, a normal person, a regular guy or girl. So, this is the Beinani. Now, we're going to later on learn that the translation of intermediate is not the way we think. But for now, let's just say it's a book for intermediate, meaning a book for regular people, what we know as the Beinani. The middle person. Not someone that's extreme in either way. So it has two names. The name Likutei Amarim and the book Sefer Shel Beinanim. Likutei Amarim, which means a compilation of teachings, and the book of Beinanim, which is generally the first section, the book of Beinanim, the book of the intermediates. Now, why is it called Tanya then? Where did it get the name Tanya? Because the very first word of the book as it begins is Tanya, which means, which is a part of the Mishnah. Another section of the Mishnah were called Brisa, and whenever the Talmud wants to teach us something from this section of the Mishnah period, which was called the Brisa, it wasn't part of the Mishnah, it was a different group called the Brisa, and so they would start off using the word Tanya, which literally means it was taught. Tanya means it was taught. It was taught and so and so. Taught, teach, like to teach, something that is taught, something that is taught. If you teach something, so Tanya means to teach. But that is the nickname. Tanya is the nickname of the book. The real book is called Sefer Shel Beinanim, the book of the intermediates. And now he gives 3 lines or 4 lines about what exactly it is. What is this book? It is compiled from sacred books, from teachers of heavenly saintliness, whose souls are in Eden, and I pointed out a few of them earlier, the Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid of Mezrich, the Reb Isaac Luria, the Maharal, the Arizal, the Ari HaKadosh, and the Shalah, the Rabbi Shlomo Halevi Horowitz, known as the Shalah, and other great Kabbalistic masters. So he says this is compiled from them, even though if you learn the book, very little of it is actually compiled, almost all of it is himself written, but in his humility he wrote that it was a compiled book. Based upon the verse, as we said here, for this thing is very near to you, kikar v'lecha davar, this thing is very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart, that you may do it. It's a little bit, translated a little bit different here. That you may do it. Okay, so it's based on this verse. The entire book of Tanya is based on this verse of 8 letters. Explaining clearly, now, he's going to give a very short mission statement here. Explaining clearly how it is exceedingly near. So he's going to explain to you, how is it near? You think it's hard, I'm going to explain to you how it's near. He's not just going to tell you it's easy. He's going to explain to you how it's easy and what it means easy. What does it mean difficult? What does it mean easy? What does it mean that it's near? Not easy. Easy is not the right word. What does it mean that it's near you? In both a lengthy and short way. B'derech arucha u'kitzara, with the aid of the Holy One, blessed be He. In a lengthy and short way. What does it mean? Or as we say, a long, short way. What does a long, short way mean? I'm going to explain it to you in a long, short way. So we take a look for a moment in the next text where this word comes from, the long, short way. This is from the Talmud. It says a story. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania said, once a child got the better of me. I was traveling and I met with a child at crossroads. I asked him, which way to the city? He answered, this way is short and long, and this way is long and short. I took the short and long way. I soon reached the city, but I found my approach obstructed by gardens and orchards. So I retracted my steps and said to the child, my son, did you not tell me this is the short way? Answer the child, did I not tell you that this is also the long way? So we have two ways how we can approach things. There are ways that are a short, longer way, and there are long, shorter ways. You know, anybody that's an investor can tell you could sometimes make quick money, but that's a short, long way to make money. You may become rich very quickly, but you can also lose it very quickly. Most investors will tell you want to be a good investor, you do it the short, long way. Little bit at a time, over long periods of time. We'll have a different class where I'll teach you investing. I'm kidding. If anyone wants to give me lessons, I'll be happy. So you have two different types of paths. You could have a path that's very short, but has a lot of obstacles. It's full of obstructions. It's full of challenges. It's full of difficulties. And then you have another path that could be a longer path, but you'll get there with more ease. What he's saying over here is that in this book of Tanya, you're going to learn how it's very easy, not very easy is the wrong word. It's very close to you. Doesn't mean easy. But it's very close to you, very near to you to fulfill this, to fulfill the commandments, to do what you have to do to serve God properly in a long, short way. Meaning, so firstly, before we read this, just on the surface, it means that I'm giving you a path that's both a long way, but it's also going to be a short way. Meaning it's going to be long, it's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult, but much less than if you go the other way. It's going to be long, but the way that it's done, it's going to be done smoothly in a way that you are able to do it. No one's saying it's going to happen overnight, but it's long. But if you follow it properly, then you'll have a much easier time. Rather than say, there are some paths to serve God that says there's a quick way, but it's a quick way in and a quick way out, where you're not actually changing anything. You know, sometimes you'll hear a speaker that will be very inspiring and say, yes, that's it, that's amazing, I'm going to go do it, I'm going to go change overnight. I'm going to lose 100 pounds overnight, right? And
not overnight. I don't recommend that.
So you don't recommend that. You recommend the slow path, but it's slow and steady.
We spoke about that.
Right. So you'll have some people that are going to be very inspirational, and yes, and you'll be convinced that overnight everything's going to change. Well, that will very quickly turn on its face. So therefore, on the surface, this is on the surface, what he's saying is that you're going to have a path. When you study this book, it's going to be a long path, but it's going to be a shorter way to take because it's going to really change you over time. Now, this is the more simplistic understanding of what he's saying. But later on, he's going to say that actually, there really is a shorter path. And if you follow that shorter path, you will actually be able to find an easier, shorter way by following that properly. You want the secret? If you come back in 3 years from now, when we're up to chapter, so I will tell you briefly what are both of these. I'll give away the secrets. In general, what he explains is there's two ways of serving God. There's one way of serving God through meditation, through learning, through studying, through learning who God is, what God is, and constantly working on it. And that is the proper way. That's the real way. I shouldn't say the real way, but that is the more smooth way of how you will become a servant of God. You learn, you study, you meditate, you work on it. Now, this may have been a good path for a Jew who was in Russia, where all that you knew about was your cow in the morning and your goat. You just had to make sure they gave milk and that your chickens laid eggs, and that was pretty much all that you had to worry about. Today, in a fast-paced, moving world, where we could read tweets and headlines by the second being updated, and we know exactly what's happening at the other end of the world within seconds of it happening. So perhaps it won't work for everyone to take a long, short path. So actually the Alter Rebbe says, he doesn't say that this is a long, short path. He says it's a long and short path. He says, I'll give you the long way. That's of course the best way. To meditate, to study, to learn, and eventually to work on yourself, to change yourself, to become a better person, to inspire yourself, and to constantly work on yourself. That's the long, shorter way. But later on, he says, there's actually a way that you could do it shorter. And what is that way? But I'm sorry, let me back up one moment. So in the longer way, how would we translate this verse? Kikara v'lecha, this is close to you. Beficha u'v'lvavcha la'asosai, in your heart, in your mouth, in your heart, and what you do in your actions. So what is the first way to do it? The long, shorter way means if you learn to refine your actions, your speech, your feelings, your emotions, your intellect, you constantly work on that. You work on yourself to change yourself, to become a different person, to become a better person. That's the long, shorter way. Long, shorter way is, it's very near, but you got to work on it. You got to work on how you do things. You got to work on how you say things. You got to work on how you feel. Your heart, your mouth, and your actions. But later on, he's going to teach us that there's also a shorter way. This is one of the very fundamentals of Chabad, especially modern day Chabad. I say modern doesn't mean to negate anything else, but as I said, we're living in an era which is more difficult. And that's where he focuses more, not in the second half, but more in the first half. Karev Alecha, that is actually very close to you. And that is the inspiration, the godly inspiration that you actually already have. You don't know about it, but you actually have it. And if you work on bringing out that soul within you, then you can actually change yourself. So you don't have to do it by meditating and learning and studying, but you can do it by actually just bringing out what you already have within you. And this is the short, long way. Now, how do you bring that out? So there's, of course, different ways of how that's brought out. But if you are able to build on what you really already have inside of you, you have essentially, naturally, a love of God inside of you. You have essentially, naturally, a connection to God inside of you. Because you have a part of God inside of you, which is going to be the very first chapter of Tanya. You actually have a part of God in you, and your job is to try and bring out that connection within you. Some people may call it the Pintel Ayid, that spark, that Jewish spark that you have in you. If you're able to bring that out, then you can actually have a closer way that will actually be a shorter way. Now, that way may not affect you or change you as much as the longer way. The longer way will actually change you as a person, as your external being of how you are. But ultimately, we recognize that you do have that shorter way as well. This gives a lot of explanation as to why we still study this book of Tanya today. Because we are able to find how in Tanya, as I said, Tanya speaks to every single Jew and to every single person. And when you're able to find this spark that you have, the godly spark that you have within you, then you are able to accomplish so much more in being the proper person who you're meant to be. And this is why in this generation, the one who is the predecessor of the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe in our generation, he says, your job is to go out, just like the Tanya says, and make it something that's very near to every Jew. Make it near to every Jew in their mouth, make it near to every Jew in their actions, make it near to every Jew in their heart. Go over and say, you think it's hard to be a Jew? It's not so hard. You have a spark within you. Here, give me your arm. I'll wrap up the fill-in quickly. Now you just did it. La so-so, you just did it, right? You just made it happen. Beficha in your mouth. Here, take a cookie, say a blessing. You just did it. It's really close to you. You didn't even know. You just made it close to you. Now this is the short, long way. To be clear, the individual is not changing by that, but you are bringing out something that's close to you. Ultimately, the first 17 chapters of Tanya talk about the long, shorter way, which is how you need to actually work on yourself and change yourself, and that is the better way to approach it. But then, from there on, we learn, well, there's also the short, longer way, which is also a way, but it's acceptable as well in the sense that it's very close to you and you can actually change and become a better person based on what you are studying. But you need to learn both ways. And so this is what he says, that it's very close to you. Once you learn this pasuk, once you learn this verse, you will be able to serve God properly. And so we're going to start learning this in subsequent classes. We're going to learn how it's near to you. What does it mean, the book of Beinanim? What does it mean, the book of intermediate individual? What is a Beinani? What is a middle person? Where do I find myself? You'll be able to look and study and say, where am I found in this picture? And then, of course, you'll look and say, how do I serve God? Now, this is a book called Lessons in Tanya. This is an older print. There's a newer print. We'll be using this book. It has a lot more in it. I'm not going to read all the commentary, but you'll have the commentary so that we'll be able to study it. It comes in a set. You could buy the full set of all 5, or you could buy one. If you want me to order it, I can order it for you, or you can just go on Amazon. They're roughly about $25 on Amazon, each one. And or you can order the set. The set is about $100 for the set of 5. And that's what we'll be using. Now, the class is actually going to take place on Mondays, not on Thursdays, but on Mondays at 11:30 a.m. Now, how many people are able to come on Memorial Day? If we start at Memorial Day. Yes, you can come Memorial Day.
No.
Also, you can't come Memorial Day? You can't come Memorial Day? You can.
No, I may not be able to make it.
Okay. Because otherwise it would be the 1st and 3rd of each month. The problem is that with the schedule coming up, first